Sarah's studio, a cozy nook filled with the scent of turpentine and the soft glow of natural light, usually hummed with happy energy. Canvases in various stages of completion leaned against walls, paint tubes lay scattered like colorful jewels, and a half-finished sculpture of a soaring bird sat on her workbench. Sarah, a talented artist with a heart as warm as the morning sun, often found her inspiration in the simple beauty of the world around her. She loved to paint vibrant landscapes and portraits that captured the very soul of her subjects. Her best friend, Emily, was often her muse, her bright smile and thoughtful eyes appearing in many of Sarah's most beloved pieces. Mark, Sarah's boyfriend of 3 happy years, was her biggest supporter, always encouraging her dreams and helping her set up for art shows. One breezy afternoon, Sarah was preparing for her biggest exhibition yet. Excitement buzzed through her as she carefully wrapped a painting, a vivid depiction of a sunset over a calm lake. She was looking forward to celebrating with Emily and Mark that evening. They were going to toast to her success, just as they always did. Sarah imagined Emily's infectious laugh, filling her small apartment, and Mark's strong arm around her, making her feel safe and loved. However, the celebratory mood never arrived. Instead, a cold, sharp shock pierced through Sarah's heart. She had gone to Mark's apartment to pick up some frames he was storing for her. The door was ajar, which was unusual. As she stepped inside, a hushed conversation drifted from his living room. It was Emily's voice, hushed and conspiratorial, followed by Mark's familiar rumble. A strange unease settled in Sarah's stomach, twisting like a knot. Curiosity, mixed with a growing dread, pulled her further into the apartment. Then she saw them. Emily and Mark. Not just talking, but tangled together on the sofa, their faces close, their whispers intimate. The frames lay forgotten on the floor as Sarah's world tilted. Her breath caught in her throat, a sharp, painful gasp that felt like a physical blow. The vibrant colors of her studio, the happy memories of her friendship with Emily, and her love for Mark all began to bleed into a murky, indistinct gray. The betrayal was like a sudden, icy plunge into a freezing lake. It wasn't just a mistake. It was a deep, cutting wound from the 2 people she trusted most in the entire world. The laughter, the shared secrets, the promises, they all shattered into a million tiny, sharp pieces around her. The image of Emily and Mark, entwined on the sofa, burned itself into Sarah's mind. It was a picture that replaced all the happy ones she had of them. The air in Mark's apartment seemed to thicken, pressing down on her, stealing her breath. She wanted to scream, to cry, to lash out, but no sound escaped her lips. Her body felt numb, yet every nerve ending was on fire with a searing pain. It was as if someone had reached into her chest and ripped out her heart, leaving a gaping, bleeding wound. Mark and Emily, startled by her sudden appearance, scrambled apart. Their faces, flushed with guilt, turned pale as they saw Sarah standing there, a ghost of her former self. Words tumbled from their mouths, a jumble of apologies and explanations, but they were just noise to Sarah. The sound was distant, muffled, like listening from underwater. All she could hear was the deafening roar of betrayal echoing in her ears. She turned and fled, not caring where she was going, just needing to escape the suffocating presence of their deceit. The city streets, usually a source of inspiration, now seemed harsh and uncaring. The vibrant colors she loved to paint now appeared dull and lifeless. Her studio, her sanctuary, felt empty and cold when she finally stumbled through its door. The canvases, once symbols of her passion, now mocked her with their silent promise of a future that felt utterly shattered. Days blurred into a hazy, sorrowful stream. Sarah barely ate, barely slept. The once bright spark in her eyes dimmed, replaced by a hollow stare. She would sit for hours, staring blankly at her unfinished bird sculpture, its hopeful flight now seeming like a cruel joke. The world outside her small apartment faded, replaced by an internal storm of grief and confusion. How could 2 people she loved so deeply inflict such pain? How could they betray her so completely? Every memory, every shared laugh, every comforting touch now felt tainted. Her friendship with Emily, once a bedrock of her life, was reduced to ashes. Her love for Mark, once a guiding light, had been extinguished in the most brutal way possible. It wasn't just a breakup, it was the collapse of her entire world, built on trust and affection. The future she had so carefully imagined, filled with art, love, and friendship, had dissolved into nothingness. She felt utterly alone, adrift in a sea of despair, convinced that she would never feel joy or trust anyone again. The pain was a constant companion, a heavy weight pressing down on her chest, making it hard to breathe, hard to think, hard to simply blame. Her vibrant artist spirit was crushed, replaced by a profound emptiness. She felt truly, completely broken. One particularly bleak morning, as Sarah sat amidst the wreckage of her emotions, a faint memory flickered through the gloom. It was a memory of her grandmother, Nana Rose, a woman whose life had been touched by many storms but who always emerged stronger, with a twinkle in her eye. Nana Rose had a saying, a simple wisdom she'd often share with Sarah during childhood scrapes and teenage heartbreaks. My dear, even the strongest trees bend in the wind, but they don't break. They learn to grow in new directions, their roots digging deeper, their branches reaching higher. Find your strength in the bending, not in the breaking. The words, whispered across the years, resonated with a gentle warmth, a tiny spark in the vast darkness that had enveloped Sarah. She pictured Nana Rose's kind, wrinkled face, her hands busy knitting or tending to her garden, always creating something beautiful from humble beginnings. Nana Rose had lost her husband young, faced financial struggles, and endured illness, yet she never let bitterness take root. She found joy in small things, and always spoke of turning pain into purpose. Sarah slowly lifted her head, her gaze falling upon the unfinished bird sculpture. Before, it had seemed like a cruel joke, a symbol of broken dreams. Now Nana Rose's words gave it a new meaning. A bird, even with a broken wing, could learn to fly again, or perhaps find a new way to soar. The thought was a tiny flicker of hope, but it was there, a fragile ember in the cold ashes of her despair. She remembered Nana Rose's unwavering belief that every ending was just a new beginning in disguise. Nana Rose always said that even thorns on a rose bush served a purpose, protecting the delicate blooms. Maybe, just maybe, this sharp, painful betrayal had a purpose too. It was a terrifying thought, but also a strangely comforting one. It meant her suffering wasn't for nothing. It meant there was a path forward, even if she couldn't see it clearly yet. The idea of truly giving up, of letting this betrayal define her as a broken person, suddenly felt like a disservice to Nana Rose's memory, a betrayal of her own spirit. Nana Rose wouldn't have wallowed. She would have dusted herself off, found a way to mend, and then built something new, something even stronger. The thought of her grandmother's resilience became a quiet challenge. Could Sarah be as strong? Could she bend without breaking? Could she find a new direction? The answer, though still trembling, was a tentative yes. The overwhelming sadness didn't vanish, but it was joined by a nascent sense of resolve. A tiny seed of determination had been planted amidst the emotional rubble. The faint whisper of Nana Rose's wisdom had planted a seed, and slowly, painstakingly, Sarah began to nurture it. The idea of letting her pain become a new kind of fuel, rather than a consuming fire, took root. She looked around her studio, once a place of vibrant joy, now a silent testament to her sorrow. But within that silence, a new resolve began to stir. If she couldn't paint the sun-drenched landscapes and happy portraits she once loved, then she would paint the storm. She would paint the darkness, the anger, the sharp edges of betrayal, and in doing so, perhaps she could find her way back to the light. With a deep, shaky breath, Sarah pushed aside the unfinished bird sculpture and cleared her largest easel. She stretched a fresh, blank canvas across it, its stark white surface, a challenge and a promise. This wouldn't be like her old art, soft and gentle. This would be raw, honest, and perhaps even a little wild. This would be her Unbroken series, a testament to surviving the storm. She squeezed tubes of paint onto her palette, not the usual cheerful blues and greens, but deep, brooding purples, fiery reds, and stark blacks. Her first brushstrokes were hesitant, then bolder, filled with a furious energy. She didn't plan, didn't sketch. She simply let the emotions flow directly from her heart, through her arm, and onto the canvas. The anger became jagged lines, the sadness transformed into swirling, dark pools, and the confusion manifested as fragmented shapes fighting for space. The first painting was a maelstrom of color and form, a visual scream of betrayal and hurt. It wasn't beautiful in the traditional sense, but it was powerful, undeniably real. When she stepped back, exhausted but oddly exhilarated, she saw not just her pain, but a glimmer of defiance. It was a painting that refused to be ignored, just as she refused to be defeated. This new artistic path felt different. It wasn't about pleasing others or capturing external beauty. It was about internal release, about finding a voice for the unspeakable. She worked with a fierce intensity she hadn't known she possessed. Her hands moved with purpose, mixing colors, layering textures, creating a visual language for her turmoil. Each stroke was a step towards understanding. Each finished piece, a small victory over the despair that had threatened to consume her. She found herself experimenting with new techniques, using thicker paint, sharper angles, and stark contrasts. Her art became a mirror, reflecting the shattered pieces of her life, but also, surprisingly, showing the resilience forming beneath the cracks. The studio, once a place of quiet sorrow, now buzzed with a different kind of energy, a fierce, determined hum of creation. Sarah was no longer just an artist. She was an alchemist, turning the lead of betrayal into the gold of artistic expression. This was her fight, and her canvas was her battlefield. The studio became Sarah's entire world. Day bled into night, and night gave way to dawn, marked only by the changing light that filtered through her window and the dwindling supply of paint on her palette. Sleep was a luxury she rarely indulged in, often catching a few hours curled up on a worn armchair, only to spring back to the easel with renewed urgency. Food became an afterthought, a quick bite, snatched between brushstrokes. This wasn't just painting. It was a desperate, consuming act of creation, a way to process the storm raging inside her. Each canvas was a diary entry, a raw and unflinching record of her emotional journey. The early pieces in the Unbroken series were dark, full of swirling shadows and fractured shapes, representing the initial shock and the feeling of being shattered. She used thick impasto, building up layers of paint that mimicked the heavy weight on her soul. Her fingers, stained with paint, would often trace the rough textures she created, finding a strange comfort in the physical manifestation of her pain. As days turned into weeks, a subtle shift began to appear in her work. The anger, once a dominant force, started to blend with a burgeoning sense of resilience. Harsh lines softened, and glimpses of brighter colors, like flashes of lightning in a stormy sky, began to break through the darkness. A deep, vibrant crimson might emerge from a swirl of charcoal gray, symbolizing the burning fire of her spirit refusing to be quenched. A stark white line would cut through a chaotic mass, representing the clarity that sometimes follows immense pain. She wasn't just splashing paint. She was sculpting with it, carving out her feelings, giving them form and voice. There was a piece where jagged shards of blue and green seemed to tear through a canvas, a visual representation of her broken trust. Another featured a solitary, strong figure, indistinct but undeniably female, standing against a turbulent backdrop, her head held high. This piece, more than any other, felt like Sarah herself, emerging from the wreckage. These were not gentle, comforting images. They were powerful, almost confrontational, demanding attention and feeling. They spoke of struggle, of endurance, of the deep, often ugly, truth of human emotion. But within their intensity, there was also an undeniable honesty, a raw beauty that came from being utterly true to herself. Friends who tried to visit often found her door locked, or if they managed to coax her out for a moment, they saw the fierce, almost feverish glow in her eyes. She was in a world of her own, a world she was creating, stroke by painful, beautiful stroke. In those long hours, amidst the fumes of turpentine and the silence of her concentration, Sarah was not just painting, she was healing. She was taking the fragments of her broken heart and piecing them back together, not into the old, familiar shape, but into something new, something stronger, something unbroken. Each finished piece was a testament to her refusal to let betrayal define her, a declaration of her own fierce spirit. While her art provided an outlet for her soul, Sarah knew that passion alone couldn't build the new life she envisioned. Nana Rose's lessons weren't just about emotional strength, they were also about practical resilience. Her grandmother had always managed to make ends meet, turning her talents into a livelihood. This betrayal had stripped Sarah of her complacency, making her realize that she needed to stand on her own 2 feet, stronger and more independent than ever before. She wanted her art to be more than just therapy. She wanted it to be her future, a successful career built entirely on her own terms. One evening, after putting the finishing touches on another powerful piece in her Unbroken series, Sarah found herself browsing online. An advertisement for a local college caught her eye. Turning Your Passion into Profit, a small business course for creatives. It was a night class, 3 evenings a week, and it looked daunting. Numbers, marketing strategies, business plans. These were territories as foreign to her as a distant galaxy. Her artistic mind, used to the fluid language of color and form, balked at the rigid structure of spreadsheets and market analysis. Yet, a stubborn determination, born from the ashes of her pain, pushed her forward. If she could face the raw agony of betrayal, she could certainly face a few challenging lectures. She signed up, feeling a mix of apprehension and a strange, thrilling sense of purpose. This wasn't just about art anymore. It was about empowerment. It was about proving to herself that she could not only survive, but thrive. The first few classes were a struggle. Terms like ROI and brand identity felt like a foreign language. She was surrounded by aspiring entrepreneurs, all buzzing with ideas and business jargon. Sarah, initially quiet and intimidated, found herself taking diligent notes, asking questions, and slowly, painstakingly, absorbing the new information. Her artistic eye, usually focused on aesthetics, began to see the patterns and structures within the business world. She learned about pricing her work fairly, about creating a strong online presence, about reaching out to galleries and collectors. The instructor, a sharp, encouraging woman named Ms. Davies, saw Sarah's potential, not just as an artist, but as a businesswoman. Ms. Davies often remarked on Sarah's unique perspective, how she approached problems with a creative flair that many of her more business-minded classmates lacked. This new challenge, though different from her art, served a similar purpose. It was a distraction from the lingering hurt, a new mountain to climb. Each concept she mastered, each business plan she drafted, felt like another step away from the shadows of betrayal and closer to a future she was actively building for herself. She was learning to translate her passion into a viable livelihood, ensuring that her art, her voice, would not only survive but flourish independently. The studio might be her soul, but the business class was becoming her backbone. As Sarah threw herself into her art and her business studies, a surprising and welcome change began to unfold in her social life. The intensity of her focus, the fierce determination that now radiated from her, began to draw new people into her orbit. She wasn't seeking out friendships. They simply appeared, attracted to the quiet strength and compelling passion she now embodied. In her business class, she found herself collaborating more often with a thoughtful young man named Alex. Alex was a budding graphic designer, keen on learning the ropes of running a creative business. He admired Sarah's artistic vision and her unwavering commitment to her craft. During group projects, he'd often stay after class to discuss marketing strategies for her Unbroken series, his practical mind complementing her artistic one. He saw the fire in her eyes, the dedication that burned bright, and it inspired him. Their conversations often strayed from business, touching on dreams, fears, and the quiet struggles of creative pursuits. Alex, unlike Mark, offered support without expectation, a steady presence that Sarah found surprisingly comforting. At the local art supply store, where Sarah now spent a good portion of her meager earnings, she struck up a conversation with an older woman named Clara. Clara, a retired art history professor, often lingered in the paint aisle, offering unsolicited but always insightful advice. She was drawn to Sarah's intense focus and the raw power she sensed in her work, glimpses of which Sarah sometimes shared in hurried conversations. Clara, with her wealth of knowledge and kind, discerning eye, became an unexpected mentor. She spoke of great artists who had channeled their deepest sorrows into their masterpieces, validating Sarah's new direction and reminding her that true art often sprang from profound human experience. Clara didn't pry into Sarah's past, but she understood the unspoken language of pain in her brushstrokes, offering encouragement and a deep respect for Sarah's process. These new connections were different from the easy, comfortable friendships she'd shared with Emily. There was no pretense, no history of shared secrets that now felt tainted. These people saw Sarah as she was now, a determined artist forging a new path. They didn't know the broken girl she had been just weeks ago, only the woman who was rebuilding herself with grit and paint. They admired her strength, not because they knew her weakness, but because her resilience was evident in every stroke of her brush and every careful note she took in class. Slowly, carefully, Sarah began to let them in. She found herself laughing more easily with Alex, sharing her ideas without fear of judgment. She cherished Clara's wise counsel, feeling a sense of intellectual and artistic camaraderie she hadn't known she needed. These friendships weren't a replacement for what she had lost, but something new, something earned. They were built on mutual respect, shared passion, and a genuine admiration for the woman Sarah was becoming. She was learning that her world hadn't fallen apart. It was simply expanding, making room for new, more authentic connections. The day of Sarah's art show arrived, a culmination of months of intense emotional and physical labor. She had secured a small, trendy gallery space downtown, a feat she wouldn't have dared to dream of just months ago. Alex had helped her design sleek invitations and set up a professional website, while Clara had leveraged her extensive network to ensure a good turnout. Sarah felt a nervous flutter in her stomach, a mix of excitement and vulnerability. Her Unbroken series was not just art. It was her soul laid bare, a public declaration of her journey through pain to resilience. As guests began to trickle in, Sarah stood by the entrance, dressed simply but elegantly, her heart pounding. The gallery, usually so quiet, now buzzed with conversations and the soft clinking of glasses. Her paintings, bold and unapologetic, hung proudly on the white walls, each one telling a story of shattered trust, raw anger, and the slow, arduous climb back to self. The colors were deep, the textures rich, and the emotions palpable. To her astonishment, the response was overwhelmingly positive. People lingered before her canvases, their faces etched with contemplation. They saw the pain, yes, but they also saw the power, the defiant beauty in her struggle. Visitors approached her, their eyes shining with understanding, sharing how her work resonated with their own experiences of overcoming hardship. They didn't know her personal story, but they felt the universal truth in her art. These pieces, they speak volumes. One woman murmured, gazing at a painting where fractured lines seemed to mend into a stronger whole. It's like looking at courage on a canvas. Quote, Alex, beaming with pride, moved through the crowd, expertly answering questions about Sarah's technique and the inspiration behind the series. Clara, with her regal presence, offered eloquent insights into the artistic merit of the collection, drawing parallels to famous artists who had found strength in their suffering. She introduced Sarah to influential collectors and gallery owners, speaking glowingly of her unique vision and powerful execution. And then the sales began. Red dots appeared next to her pieces, one after another. The painting that represented her initial shock, the one she thought might be too raw, was among the first to sell, then the one with the defiant figure, and another where dark blues gave way to brilliant golds. Each sale was more than just a money. It was a validation, a confirmation that her pain had been transformed into something meaningful, something valuable. By the end of the evening, almost every piece in the Unbroken series had found a new home. Sarah stood amidst the dwindling crowd, a warm glow spreading through her. She felt lighter, as if the heavy burden of her past had finally been lifted and repurposed. The success of the show was not just a personal triumph. It was a public declaration of her newfound strength and independence. It was proof that she had not only survived, but had turned her deepest hurt into her greatest artistic achievement. The world had seen her storm, and it had admired her for weathering it. News of Sarah's successful art show spread quickly through their small city, reaching even the ears of Emily and Mark. They saw the newspaper articles, read the glowing reviews online, and heard the whispers of her triumph. It was impossible to ignore. Her name, once synonymous with a quiet, talented artist, was now spoken with a new reverence, associated with strength and raw emotional power. The very pain they had caused had been transformed into something remarkable, something they couldn't help but acknowledge. Emily, who had retreated into a cloud of guilt and self-reproach after the betrayal, felt a pang of complex emotions. Seeing Sarah's success, her vibrant new life, made her own choices seem even more petty and destructive. She missed the easy camaraderie, the shared dreams, the laughter they once shared. Mark, too, felt a strange mix of regret and surprise. He had expected Sarah to crumble, perhaps to leave the city, to fade into obscurity. Instead, she had blossomed into a force, stronger and more independent than the woman he had known. One afternoon, a few weeks after the show, Sarah was packing up the last of her paintings from the gallery. She was humming a quiet tune, a light-hearted melody she'd composed herself. The doorbell chimed, and when she opened it, her breath caught in her throat. Standing there, looking small and awkward, were Emily and Mark. Emily's eyes were red-rimmed, and Mark's shoulders were hunched. They looked nothing like the confident, self-assured people Sarah had known. "Sarah," Emily began, her voice barely a whisper, "we saw your show." "It was incredible." Mark nodded, adding, "We just wanted to say we're truly sorry. For everything." Sarah looked at them, truly looked at them, for the first time in months. The sharp stab of pain she once felt at their sight was gone, replaced by a quiet, almost detached understanding. Their apologies, once desperately longed for, now felt hollow. Too little, too late. The words were familiar, the faces were familiar, but the emotional connection had been severed, replaced by an unbridgeable distance. "I appreciate you coming," Sarah said, her voice calm and steady, devoid of anger or bitterness. "But I've moved on." Quote, Emily took a step forward, a plea in her eyes. "Can we talk? Please? I know we messed up, but our friendship meant so much to me." Mark chimed in. "We were wrong, Sarah. So wrong." Sarah shook her head gently. "There's nothing left to talk about. The past is the past. I've built a new life, and there's no room for what happened then." Her eyes met theirs, clear and firm. "I wish you both well." She didn't slam the door, didn't yell, didn't cry. She simply closed it, softly but definitively, leaving them standing on the outside of the life she had so painstakingly rebuilt. The encounter, while a brief ripple, didn't disturb the calm surface of her new beginning. She had indeed moved on. As the door clicked shut on Emily and Mark, Sarah leaned against it for a moment, a soft sigh escaping her lips. There was no triumph, no lingering resentment, just a quiet sense of closure. She walked back into the now empty gallery space, the last few unbroken paintings waiting to be delivered to their new owners. The scent of fresh paint and possibility hung in the air. She picked up a small, framed photo from a nearby table, a faded picture of Nana Rose, her eyes twinkling with that familiar wisdom. A gentle smile touched Sarah's lips. It was true, what her grandmother had always said, sometimes the hardest lessons led to the greatest growth. Looking back, Sarah realized that the devastating betrayal, though it had felt like the end of her world, had actually been a harsh, unwelcome catalyst. Before, she had been content, happy even. But her happiness had been fragile, built on the foundations of other people's loyalty and affection. She had been a talented artist, yes, but one who relied heavily on validation and comfort. She painted beautiful landscapes, portraits of friends, safe and pleasing art. She hadn't pushed her boundaries, hadn't dared to explore the darker, more complex emotions within herself. The betrayal had shattered that complacency. It had forced her to look inward, to confront her deepest pain, and to find a strength she never knew she possessed. It had propelled her into her studio, where she wrestled with her emotions and emerged with the raw, honest power of the Unbroken series. It had pushed her into that daunting business class, where she learned to navigate the world with independence and strategic thinking, turning her passion into a profession. It had opened her up to new, authentic friendships, built on mutual respect rather than shared history. She thought of the early days of her despair, curled up in her studio, unable to eat or sleep. The girl she was then felt miles away, a ghost of a past self. The pain hadn't magically disappeared, but it had been transformed. It was no longer a wound that festered, but a scar that told a story of survival, a testament to her resilience. Sarah ran her hand over one of the canvases, feeling the thick, textured paint. Each stroke represented a tear shed, an angry thought, a moment of doubt overcome. The vibrant colors that now broke through the darker hues were not just artistic choices. They were symbols of her own emerging joy and self-discovery. She realized that Emily and Mark's actions, however cruel, had been the painful push she needed to truly find herself. They had stripped away everything familiar, leaving her with no choice but to rebuild. Brick by painful brick, a stronger, more authentic version of herself. She was not just an artist anymore. She was an entrepreneur, a survivor, a woman who knew her worth and was forging her own path. Her response had indeed been brilliant, not because she didn't fall apart, but because she gathered those broken pieces and built something truly magnificent. The pain had been a gift, a harsh but undeniable motivation that had led her to a life richer, more fulfilling, and undeniably her own.